Hey everyone, Shane here with etrailer.com. Behind me I have a 2007 Fleetwood Bounder Motorhome, and I want to walk through how to install the Roadmaster Steering Stabilizer. But before we get it installed, I want to go over some of the tools we're going to need to get it installed, and I also want to go over a little bit of why you would need it, the bad situations of not having it, and some of my personal experiences I've had without having one on. Now, the motorhome behind me is a family member's. I've driven it several times, so I do have personal experience of driving this motorhome. I highly recommend anybody that has a motorhome that does not have one of these to put one on. What this is going to do is when you are driving down the road, if you don't have one, you'll notice that your RV kind of floats in the lane, and it gets tiring. You may have also noticed if you've hit like a little divot in the road, the steering wheel will pull, and then you have to counter steer. But by the time you counter steer, it takes a second for the RV to catch up. Now you're going over to the other side, and then you have to counter steer before you actually get over there to time to get the RV back over. So what the steering stabilizer does is it keeps your wheels centered. Once it's installed, as a spring or as you turn, the spring will pull or push together. If it pulls, it's going to want to pull back together or come back together to its normal state. If it squeezes together because you're turning the opposite way, it's going to want to push out to bring it back to normal state. That way, you're not doing this all the time, and you can drive comfortably. Another good thing about this is if you happen to get a flat tire on the front end. You see how tall the motorhome is. If you happen to get a flat tire, the steering wheel is going to be very heavy. It's going to be like a car, but twice as bad. If you've ever had a flat tire in a car, especially on the front wheel, when that tire goes flat, that steering wheel pulls, and you're trying to fight it back so it doesn't go that way. With the motorhome being this tall, 3 times as heavy as a car, imagine getting a flat tire on the front end. It's going to be very hard to fight that steering wheel. Putting this on, if you get a flat tire, it's going to help keep the wheels straight so you're not fighting that steering wheel as much. Now let's go into some of my personal experiences. I actually had this situation when I was bringing this motorhome back here to put this on. I've been trying to talk my uncle into getting this for quite a while, and he's a penny pincher and didn't want to do it. He's finally doing it. We were on our way back, and I was going down a 2-lane road with no shoulders, and I was coming up this little bridge, and it was a small bridge that just goes over a creek. Well, there was a truck coming the opposite direction. Remember, there's no shoulders. Right when I got up to the bridge, the truck was about to get on the bridge the other side. I hit a little divot in the road, it pulled the steering wheel, and it made the front end go over into his lane. I had to counter steer. When I counter steered, the walls on the bridge were so shallow, again, because there's no shoulder, and on each side there's a railing that comes out to the road. I got it back over, was crossing the same time. When I saw him pass me, I was clear. I looked in my passenger mirror, and I was about 4 inches from that railing. What happened was my gluteus maximus tightened up, and I got a shiver. It went up my spine. Now, I was in law enforcement 12 years. We called that the pucker factor. If you've ever had the pucker factor in a situation, you'll know what I'm talking about. If not, go ask a cop, let him explain it to you a little bit better. But that was one of my experiences. I've also had it going down the highway, a big crosswind. It's one to push over against that RV because it's tall. Having to fight that steering wheel becomes pain, and it tires you out. Crossing a tractor trailer or having a tractor trailer come next to you. Tractor trailer is going to be just as tall, if not taller. You're getting a lot of wind in between the RV and the tractor trailer, so it's pushing you. Having to fight that steering wheel again is very tough. With this being put on, you're not going to have to do that. It's really going to help keep that steering wheel straight so that when you get to where you're going, you're not wore out, you're not tired, you don't have to get your camper set up and go right to bed. Now that we've gone over some of the features, what we're going to do is we're going to take it out for a ride without this on. We don't have a lot of wind today, so we may not get a lot of crosswind, but we're going to take it out for a ride before we get it installed, and I want to show you how much that steering wheel moves just going in the lane. And then once we get it on, we'll take it back out again, and I'll show you how it doesn't move. So we're on the highway here. We're only doing about 55 almost. And again, we don't have a whole lot of wind, so we don't have a lot of crosswind pushing the RV. But you can see still, I'm still having to counter steer the RV in the lane because it wants to float. And we want to prevent that because we don't want to have to do this on a 5-hour trip. Trust me, I've done it. I've driven this back from Memphis and pulling a car behind this RV, doing this the whole time with a lot of traffic. It's nerve-wracking. So as this next truck passes, I'm not going to counter steer, and you can see how the RV is pushing. So you know I'm not just playing in the lane. It's actually moving the RV, and I have to counter steer it. We got a track trailer in front of us. We got one passing us, and that crosswind I was talking about kind of makes the camper wobble a little bit. Again, it's pushing us over. So it's nerve-wracking. Now after we get this installed, you'll see a big difference. You're not gonna see the steering wheel moving around like this all the time because we're gonna be going straight. Now with our steering stabilizer on, we're back out on the highway, and we're gonna see how it does. Not a whole lot of counter steering like we had before we put it on. So it's going to make the ride a lot more comfortable, a lot less nerve-wracking. So we're not going to be as tired when we get to where we're going. Now, one thing I want to mention, with any vehicle, you're always going to have some kind of counter steering you're going to have to do. But if we can drastically minimize how much movement that we have to do with the steering wheel, that means we're tracking down the road straight. And you can see I'm not having to move this steering wheel half as much as I had to before we put the steering stabilizer on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to make your driving experience a lot better. This is what our steering stabilizer is going to look like once it's installed. You can see it attaches to the steering arm. It's going to have a nice red powder coat finish, so it's going to hold up really well against all weather conditions. You can see it's going to have a shock down the center that helps with that compression. Again, if you don't have one of these, I highly recommend it. For some of the parts we're going to need, here's our steering stabilizer, here's the 2 brackets, the 2 U-bolts, and the 2 half-inch bolts. This is what is going to come in your kit. Parts we're going to need to get this installed. I recommend using an impact, so when we put the U-bolt nuts back on, we're not sitting there cranking them down until they get tight. You're going to need a large torque wrench because the 2 nuts on the U-bolts have to be torqued down for the size U-bolts that you have on your motorhome. We're going to need a couple of wrenches, a 19mm wrench. We're going to need a 15/16 socket for the U-bolt nuts, a 14mm socket, 19mm socket, and then I actually pulled half-inch 14mm, 19mm for the smaller wrench, so when I'm putting these on, I can get them on there a little bit quicker, and then we'll come back and we'll torque them down with the other ones. So the tape trick. Well, the best way to do this is find a flat parking lot that's empty, and what we're going to do is we're going to drive, get our wheels lined up. We're going to take this tape and we're going to put it on our column here where it's turning, and this part down here, and then we're going to split it in half. That way when we get back to our house or wherever we're doing it, we can line those 2 pieces of tape up, and that's going to ensure that our steering or our wheels are straight when we go to put our steering stabilizer on, and hopefully we won't have to make any adjustments. And we don't have to drive fast. take this, and again, it doesn't matter what kind of tape. I'm using painter's tape. And then we'll take that and we'll just cut that in half. And we'll get it back to the shop, get our tape lined up, and start installing the steering stabilizer. To start our installation, we're going to come to our passenger side and we're going to locate the two U-bolts. We're going to find the back one, come down to the bottom, and locate the two nuts. We need to remove those two nuts. We're going to take the 15/16 socket and remove them. We're going to take this bracket, these two slots are going to mount on our bolts. We want to make sure that this is facing back and towards the inside. So it's going to go on just like that, and then you can reinstall the washers and nuts that we just removed. Now we're going to tighten them down and then come back and torque them to the specifications recommended by the manufacturer and your size U-bolt. Now we're going to take this bracket. This is going to sit right on the bottom side of your steering arm. This edge is going to face towards the front, like that. You're going to take your U-bolts around the bar into the bracket. We'll install a flat washer and then a nylon lock nut. Now we'll take our 14mm socket and we're going to tighten the nuts up just enough to where we can still move it, but it holds it in place. For this bracket, we're going to take our 1/2" bolt, we're going to go from the bottom up. We're going to put on a flat washer. We're going to take our stabilizer. We want the spring side on this bracket. We're going to slide it over the top. Put on another flat washer. And then the nylon lock nut. Now we're not going to tighten it down at this time. We just want to loosely install it. For the bracket that's attached to our U-bolt, we're going to take our 1/2" bolt. We're going to go down from the top. We're going to put a flat washer on. We're going to take the other end of our steering stabilizer, run it through like that, and then we'll do the same thing here. We'll put on our flat washer and then our nylon lock nut. Now from here, what we're going to do is we're going to tighten this side first, and then we'll get our other bracket straightened up and we'll get those tightened down. 19mm socket and wrench. We'll get these tight. And then come back and we can snug up this side. Once we get those two, we're going to make sure that this bracket is straight, and we're going to come back and we're going to snug these up. With these, you want to make sure you kind of go back and forth on them. You don't want one side a lot longer than the other one, so we want to try and do them evenly. And we're going to come back and torque the rest of our hardware to the specifications and the instructions. Again, when you're torquing the U-bolts, make sure you do it the same way. Kind of go back and forth. Now that we got it on, we can take it out for a test drive and see if we need to make any adjustments. Now we're back at the shop here. We're not going to have to make any adjustments, but if you do, the bracket that has the 2 U-bolts on it, you're just going to loosen U-bolts and adjust that bracket as necessary, and then tighten them back up. And then, of course, torque them to the specifications and the instructions. That's going to do it for a look at and installation on the Roadmaster Steering Stabilizer on a 2007 Fleetwood Bounder Motorhome.